Hello, and thank you for downloading Witness from the BBC World Service. It's more than 475 years since Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, was executed in London, and yet she's still remembered to this day. Louise Hidalgo takes us back to her final hours.
It's May the 18th, 1536, and in the Tower of London, a dark-haired woman paces the floor, waiting for news of her execution. It had been in these same royal apartments that 3 years earlier Anne Boleyn had waited to be taken to be crowned Queen of England. Her husband, Henry VIII, had risked wars and broken with the Catholic Church in Rome to win her hand. Now, after just 3 years of marriage, he's turned against her.
The coup against her was so sudden.
What, 2 weeks from her
17
arrest?
days from arrest to execution.
Historian Alison Weir has written a book on Anne Boleyn's dramatic fall.
It was the scandal of Europe. It was commented on across all the courts of Europe because of the charges against her. Adultery with 5 men, one her own brother, plotting to kill the king. But at her trial, she spoke up so eloquently that people were beginning to think that an occasion had been made to get rid of her.
Anne was reportedly hysterical when she was first brought to the Tower of London.
And she also seemed to veer between laughter and hysteria and tears. I think she must have known what was in store for her, because few people who are accused of treason ever escaped the axe.
Did Anne believe that she might be the exception, and that there would be a last-minute reprieve from the king, her husband? We don't know. But by the day set for her execution, just 3 days after her trial had ended, Anne seems to have resigned herself to her fate.
Alone in prison strange, I wail my destiny. Well worth this cruel hap that I should taste this misery. Toll on, thou passing bell, ring out my doleful knell. Let thy sound my death tell. Death doth draw nigh. There is no remedy.
That morning, the 18th of May, Anne sent for the man charged with organising the first public execution of a Queen of England, the Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston.
And at my coming she said,
Mr. Kingston, I hear I shall not die afore noon, and I am very sorry therefore, for I thought to be dead by this time and past my pain.
I told her it should be no pain, it was so little. And then she said,
I heard say the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck.
And then put her hands about it, laughing heartily. I have seen many men and also women executed, and all they have been in great sorrow. But to my knowledge, this lady has much joy and pleasure in death.
As Sir William stood there, Anne Boleyn swore on the Holy Sacrament that she was innocent of the charges she'd been found guilty of.
For now I die, I die, I die, I die, I die.
When Anne Boleyn finally walked out of the royal apartments at the Tower for the last time on the 19th of May to face her executioner, many of those watching were impressed by her calm composure.
She walks through the courtyard and through the massive Cold Harbour Gate, which is to the right of the White Tower as you face it from the river. And straight ahead of her through that gate was a crowd of 1,000 people, all surrounding this new scaffold.
Of course, she was the first ever English queen to be publicly executed.
She was, and this was sensational. And on the day of her execution, she carried herself with such courage and bravery and spoke so convincingly on the scaffold that the crowds began to murmur that she was innocent.
The king had ordered that a special swordsman be brought from France to carry out the execution instead of the usual axe, which didn't always kill on the first stroke.
Once she mounted the steps, assisted by Sir William Kingston, some people say she was even cheerful, even smiling. She was on the way to the execution constantly looking behind her as if she perhaps expected a reprieve, but she said herself on the scaffold, I know I will have no reprieve.
If in my life I did ever offend the King's grace, surely with my death I do now atone. I come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused, as I know full well that aught I say in my defence does not appertain to you. I pray and beseech you all, good friends, to pray for the life of the king, my sovereign lord, and yours, who is one of the best princes on the face of the earth, who has always treated me so well that better could not be. Wherefore I submit to death with good will, humbly asking pardon of all the world. If any person will meddle with my cause, I require them to judge the best. Thus I take my leave of the world, and of you, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul.
And then came the moment where she had to be undressed, as it were, for the execution. She had 4 weeping maids of honour with her, who were all very distressed. They took off the white ermine cape that had been around her shoulders. She was wearing a very low-necked gown of black or grey damask with a crimson underskirt. And the crimson underskirt, the red, it's the liturgical Catholic colour of martyrdom. It would have been a very visible protest of her innocence, the significance of which would not have been lost on all those watching.
And she would have chosen that deliberately.
I think she chose it deliberately. Absolutely. Her hood was removed, her necklace was removed, she undressed her neck herself, we are told, and there's some dispute as to whether she tied her own blindfold or whether her ladies tied it for her.
Anne Boleyn then knelt and began to pray, as, unseen by her, the executioner swung his sword and at a single stroke cut her head from her body.
The 4 ladies came forward and wrapped the head in a white cloth, wrapped the body in a white cloth. Sir William Kingston had been so busy that no provision had been made for a coffin. They'd gone to the Tower Armouries, probably that morning, and got an arrow chest out, and that was laid ready by the scaffold. Our ladies together carried it into the adjacent Royal Chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. There it was buried 3 hours after the execution. Now, during that time, the ladies had to strip the body of its rich robes. Now, these were traditionally the perquisite of the executioner, but the king later redeemed them for cash. He didn't want relics of his late wife being touted around, as spectacles.
Anne Boleyn's remains were buried in an unmarked grave next to those of her brother, one of her co-accused, who'd been executed at the Tower 2 days earlier. She was believed to be 35, and she left behind a 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth.
Many people believe the charges that she got her just deserts, but you get a few. Of course, Anne Boleyn was a great reformist. She remained a Catholic to her death, but she wanted to see the Catholic faith reformed, and reformers were all in great grief at her passing.
And what of Henry, her husband? Even before Anne died, he was courting his next wife, Jane Seymour. And the ambassador of the Holy Roman Emperor, Eustace Terpuis, reported back to his master that he had never seen the English king so happy as he was following Anne's arrest.
He is going out to dinner here, there, and everywhere with the ladies. Sometimes he returns along the river after midnight to the sound of many instruments or the voices of the singers of his chamber, who do their utmost to interpret his delight at being rid of that thin old woman.
After Anne had been executed, the cannon on the Tower Wharf boomed out the message to anyone who was aware of what was going on, and the king could hear this at Greenwich, and he immediately took a barge and came along the river to Chelsea, where Jane Seymour was staying in the house that had belonged to Sir Thomas More. And Henry dined with her there and spent the rest of the day with her.
The day after Anne Boleyn died, Henry VIII announced his engagement to Jane Seymour. She would be the only one of his 6 wives who would give him the male heir that Anne had failed to give him and which he so desperately craved. But it would be Anne and Henry's daughter, Elizabeth, who would go on to become one of the great monarchs of English history.
Louise Hidalgo. For details of our complete range of downloads and our terms of use, go to BBC World Service